Welcome back to Hour 2 of Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis, sitting in for Dave Schrader, who will be back on Monday night for Supernatural News and Parashare Monday. If you have a true paranormal experience you'd like to submit to us so that we can read your story on air, email Dave at dave@darknessradio.com, or you can wait until Monday and you can call us on the live show and share your experiences with us. Our guest for this hour and last hour is Mike Pettigrew. Again, unlockgratitude.now.com/gift. There's plenty of free stuff for you there, including the entire text of the book that we've been talking about for the last hour. Now, I teased at the end of last hour, Mike, that there are two very powerful emotions in life, fear and love. I think fear is even stronger than anger. Anger can get you through to the point where you stop being angry.
That's right.
But fear can rule for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. Now, it seems to me that fear is pretty hard to overcome. You have a lot of people these days who have issues with anxiety. They have issues with being frozen in their lives, their everyday lives. Think of the one thing you want to achieve most in the world, and to you it seems a mile away because of the fear of the unknown. And that's all it is the fear of the unknown. You don't know your path. And if you don't know your path, you feel lost already. You don't feel like you have a kind of a setting on it or a compass to lead you where you want to go. What is it about fear that's so overwhelming that we can't overcome it?
I think you're quite right, Tim. Love and fear are the two most potent forces that we can experience. And I think if you look at love, the greatest things that happen in our world are as a result of love and compassion. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the worst atrocities that happen on our planet are actually, if you boil it down, it's fear at its base. You might say anger. No, it's anger. It's aggression. No. You boil it down. Even below anger comes fear. Fear motivates anger. Mm-hmm. So I think fear and anger can totally twist us. And if we are fearful over a long period of time, it can absolutely wreck our lives. But you've got to look at why do we experience certain things? We all have within ourselves all this negative. We all have a negative voice within ourselves as well as a positive voice. It's that part of ourselves that says, "Don't bother," or "You're not good enough," or "You couldn't do it anyway," or "You tried and failed before. What's the point?" There is a negative part of ourselves that is constantly trying to pull us backwards. And it comes as a result of conditioning by our parents, our peers, society, the media, religions, governments. We're literally programmed from the time we're born onwards. And so our subconscious mind is full of these completely negative and rubbishy, trashy viewpoints and things and beliefs, and so much of what's rattling around in our subconscious is completely erroneous, but it's created through this conditioning, and it's very hard to break. And fear is once again one of these negative aspects of ourselves that can wreak havoc. But it is possible to melt fear. It is possible to overcome all this negative conditioning. It is possible to overcome this negative voice that we all have. Now, as long as we live, we're going to have fear. As long as we live, we are going to have this negative part of ourselves. But the secret is, do we allow it to dominate, or do we overcome it? I mean, anybody who is in fearful situations regularly, like soldiers, they'll tell you that there is fear when they are running into battle, but they do not allow the fear to dominate. It's whether we allow something to dominate us or not determines what happens. So fear, once again, is something that its effect can be reduced by, once again, my crazy gratitude experiment. A friend of mine years ago, the same healer that I mentioned at the beginning of the program, he said, fear, F-E-A-R, friendly energy announcing risk. Friendly energy announcing risk. It's an acronym I hadn't heard before or since.
That friend wasn't Gary Busey by chance, was it?
No.
Okay.
He's actually died a few years ago.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Anyway, as I say, fear can dominate us, but we can reduce the fear using such things as my crazy gratitude experiment, but also, though all this negative conditioning, all this negative stuff that we have within us, it can also be weakened by using such things as self-hypnosis, using affirmations, subliminal technology. There's ways that it can be reduced, because I honestly feel, Tim, that the only difference between an ordinary person and an extraordinary person is someone who overcomes regularly their negative side to their life. It'll always be there, but whether or not we can overcome it will determine what we can achieve during our life. And there are ways, very, very effective ways to do that. Self-hypnosis is an amazing tool that can be used. I mean, there are self-hypnosis can be used to overcome negative, painful situations in the past and the way they're affecting us today. That if you were to use psychotherapy, it could take years. Self-hypnosis can literally overcome these type of things much more quickly. And you don't need to go to a hypnotist to use self-hypnosis. There are countless websites and iPhone apps and Android apps that will allow you to overcome fear and all sorts of other conditions. And these things really work, because the way they work, as I say, your subconscious conditioning actually determines the course of your life. If you believe something, if you believe you can do something consciously, but subconsciously, your subconscious mind says, no, I'm not worthy, I can't, then do you know what? Your subconscious mind always wins out, even if you consciously believe something. So it's really important to use very effective tools, strategies, and techniques to overcome that negative subconscious programming. It's so vital. And when you manage to do that, when you take action, life changes. Life changes quite rapidly.
In your experience, does that self-hypnosis and other tools help lessen the effects of anxiety? There are a lot of people out there that are suffering. It seems like there are more now suffering with anxiety than at any other time I can remember. Is it a combination of modern medicine and being able to somehow reprogram your subconscious to combat anxiety?
That's a great question, Tim, and you've actually put your thumb on it, your finger on it there. There are cases where if people are suffering from deep fear or anxiety, yes, you absolutely must take medical guidance from a physician. But at the same time, it can definitely help to look into such things as self-hypnosis. I'm certainly not a doctor. I'm certainly not an expert in medical areas. So this is not a diagnosis of by any means. But yes, both in combination can work wonders, but always under the supervision of a medical practitioner if you are suffering from anxiety and if you are currently taking medication for anxiety. Keep taking the medication. Do this very carefully and slowly under supervision, and amazing things can happen.
Let's switch gears with fear here, and we have about 2 minutes left in this segment, but we're going to go from fear of things in everyday life and over-anxious fears such as anxiety, and let's go to the fear of the unknown and fear of death in the afterlife. It's been a huge subject in the past in my life, and I believe now currently still with Dave. And this is a fear that a lot of people realistically have. It's something that we're never going to avoid. We're never going to get out of this life alive. I think it was Jim Morrison who said that. But how do we get down to brass tacks of how we're going to deal with the inevitable?
Yeah, I think if death is the end, if it's completely annihilation, my goodness, that's the most scary thing imaginable. There's nothing more frightening than that. If it's really is the end, that's terrible. But if you, as I said, if you take the time to search deeply, I remember there was a great human being who lived about 1,000 or 2 years ago, and he said that if you want to understand life, you must first study death. Now, back in the times when he was alive, it wasn't very easy to study death, but now, now we have no excuse. Back in 1977, when my cousin died, the only book about life after death, about the near-death experience, was by Dr. Raymond Moody. It was the only book. It was the first book about the near-death experience. Now there are hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of books there on exactly the same subject, because if we want to understand life, we must first learn about death. We're in no better age than right now. There is so much we can learn right here and right now. And as I say, a lot of this evidence comes from science. It comes from science. I remember way back in 1982, the Gallup polling organization found that 8 million, that's 8 million adult Americans had a near-death experience. Now, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. Now, you could say, oh, 8 million people have imagined something. No. When it comes to near-death experiences, a lot of things happen to the individual whose heart has stopped beating that can later on be verified. For example, I have a friend, and years ago she was a nurse, and I think she was giving birth to her first son, and she died. She died for a couple of minutes. And her husband was pacing up and down the corridor outside the operating theatre. Now, he did not know that she had died, and but he knew that it was critical. And he was thinking, oh no, if she dies, I'm going to have to put the children into foster care. I can't handle it on my own. Sorry, it wasn't her first child, it was her third child. So he already had 2 children. He thought, I have to put them into foster care. And later, after she was resuscitated, the first thing she said to her husband was, how could you dare think about putting our children into foster care? How could you? And he said, what? How did you know that? I was thinking that. She said, I heard you thinking it, because she passed through the walls of the hospital. She passed through the walls. She went out into the corridor and heard the thoughts of her husband. Now, that's one of millions of such examples. And this real world correlation that can be backed up by pure evidence, it shows that something's happening. And I know in some operating I remember hearing about one operating theatre.
Well, let's take a break right here, Mike. When we come back, let's get that story about the operating theatre and about some of these experiences with death. We'll do that in just a moment here. Mike Pettigrew is our guest, and the book is Unlock Gratitude Now. Go to unlockgratitudenow.com/gift for the best deal you're going to get all weekend. Free text of the book, the entire book. Also a free audiobook and a free video. It's all at unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. When we come back, more with Mike Pettigrew here on Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal talk radio, Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis, filling in for Dave Schrader. Our guest is Mike Pettigrew. The book is Unlocking Gratitude Now. Again, unlockinggratitudenow.com/gift. Go there right now and get your free. It's the best free offer you're going to get all weekend, Mike. I'm convinced of this.
Thank you.
The entire text of the book, a free audiobook, and a free video, all are yours if you go to Unlocking Gratitude. It's Unlocking Gratitude, or Unlock.
No, it's actually Unlock Gratitude.
Unlockgratitudenow.com. I'm sorry.
No problem.
A little bit of a brain fart there. Now, we were talking before the break there about another experience in the operating theater that you wanted to talk about, the fear of death and it being the final thing, and people getting evidence of there being an afterlife through near-death experience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was just going to say that I know at least one hospital in the operating theater that I think they put an old shoe above one of the lights, or it was on top of on top of a cabinet in the operating theatre. And a couple of times where people actually physically died, they were able to talk about the shoe on top of the cabinet in the operating theatre. Now, it wasn't viewable from the ground. It was not, You couldn't see it from the operating table. But so many times that people who die for a minute or two and are then resuscitated remember vividly what the doctors and nurses were saying, while they were trying to revive the person. And as I say, people do find themselves moving through walls, overhearing conversations that can later be verified. Of course, many people move through a tunnel and find themselves in a bright light and meet deceased relatives. And sometimes information is conveyed to that person by the deceased relative that later on can be verified. So there's a lot of correlation here. These are not airy-fairy experiences as resulting from an oxygen-starved brain. Mm-hmm. Real things, real physical life correlation can be found.
Now, let me ask you this, because there's another side to the near-death experience we've heard about. And this is what, we have a show over here in America, 2020, that has been on for decades. And I remember watching it as a kid, and I remember the near-death experience when they were first reporting on near-death experiences and the information Dr. Moody had put forward. And I remember absolutely being terrified by a man who said, I had a near-death experience, and where I went, it was dark, it was hot, and there were screams. And I knew at that moment I had to change my life around. Now, that to me, okay, and I'm going to speak for Dave here. If I have a near-death experience, and that's what I'm seeing, sure, if I'm fortunate enough to get back here, my life does a 180 because obviously I'm not doing something right. But how common is it for you in your research into the paranormal? How common are those negative NDEs?
Well, Tim, they do happen. They do happen, and nobody wants to talk about them. And a friend of mine, Daniel Brinkley, I think you've had him on the show at least once. Yep. And Daniel's an amazing human being. And he had I think the world's longest clinically documented near-death experience. He was gone for 28 minutes. But in I think he's had 4 near-death experiences.
Wow.
And in the first one, he met this being of light. At this point, a lot of people interpret this being of light as, maybe an angel, God, Jesus, Buddha, Allah, whoever, Krishna. But it seems as though that being of light that we meet is actually our higher self. It's a much bigger aspect of ourselves that we're merging with that person again. But in Daniel's experience, he met that being of light. He re-experienced everything that he went through during his life from the perspective not just of himself but everybody that he affected and hurt. But he also remembers seeing, he describes beings that were vibrating at a much lower frequency than him, and he didn't really want to look there. He said it was kind of a blue-grey, treacly sort of place, and he just didn't want to focus on that. He's talked about it more since then. But yeah, I think, the saying, birds of a feather flock together. I think we can, if I'm not saying there's a heaven and there's a hell, I'm not saying that at all. And it's very clear that this being of light does not judge you. There's infinite compassion. But you have to look at what is the result of either a positive or negative near-death experience. It usually positively impacts the person's life from that point forwards. Always positively impacts the person's life. I think that there are realms of existence where people can go who, they need to work some stuff out before they can really progress on to their true destination. I think as human beings, we judge ourselves terribly. And I think we can put ourselves in self-created hells, as you might say. Mm-hmm. But it's not eternity. It's self-imposed, and always there is growth and learning from everything. And this we can see this in our daily life, our daily experiences. We all, at some point in our lives, experience real hardship. And depending on how we face that hardship, years later, we can look back, usually, and see how it's helped us to change positively, or the qualities it's helped us to grow. So I think nothing is wasted, no matter how rough things become in life. Nothing is wasted. It's always in the fullness of time that you can see the reasons for things. And, me losing everything back, 12 years ago, having been very successful in business, selling my company to multinational, I thought I had it made. And it all swept away. By golly, it was extremely painful. But looking back, I am so grateful, Tim, for that experience, because it's made me a better person, a wiser, more compassionate person. And it's made me deeply desire to help other people to overcome similar situations in their lives. So that's why I'm actually on the radio with you right now doing this interview.
Well, yeah.
So everything negative can have a very positive outcome long term.
Why is it that negativity produces a more positive outcome than positivity creating a positive outcome? Are we just more motivated? Is the negative emotion like nitro compared to gasoline with a positive emotion?
A great question. And this is so important, because I think it's really like where we're headed as human beings. We're all trying to become like polished diamonds, and we have to cut off the rough edges, and hardship does that for us. And as we progress towards the end of our lives, if we're really working at, if we're working our way through our problems, and we all have huge problems, all of us, all at some stage, it enables us to become wiser, more compassionate, fuller, richer human beings. But you know what? If you look at an airplane taking off, it's the air resistance that's pushing against the airplane that enables it to take off. We need negativity in our lives. We need problems. We need difficulties. Otherwise, we don't change. We don't change. We just continue on our merry way in the same way. Now, it's not pleasant. Nobody likes to suffer. Nobody likes to go through hardship. But you know what? If it weren't for this negative resistance and negative challenges, we wouldn't grow. We wouldn't grow. It's in the Far East, the symbol of the lotus flower. The lotus flower is a beautiful flower, and it blooms in a muddy swamp. The muddier the swamp, the more potential for a beautiful flower. It won't grow very well in a swimming pool where everything's hunky-dory.
Right, absolutely. Mike, let's take our break here at the bottom of the hour. When we come back, we're talking hunky-dory now, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the not-so-hunky-dory, and that has to do with Earthbound spirits. I want to get your take on that. Again, the website is unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. Go there to get the entire text of the book for free. Also get another audiobook and video from Mike. It's the best deal you're going to get all weekend, folks. Again, unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. When we come back, more with Mike Pettigrew here on Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal talk radio, Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennison for Dave Schrader. Our guest is Mike Pettigrew. He has a book out there called Unlock Gratitude Now, 7 Keys to a Happier and More Successful Life. You can get the book absolutely free by going to unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. Mike's giving it to you for the weekend. It's a special deal for our Darkness Radio listeners. You're also getting another free audiobook. You're also getting a free video. And stuff that will change your life around, folks. And this coming from a skeptic. 2 skeptics on the air with you right now. Check it out right now, unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. Okay, Mike, I teased before the end of the last segment. I want to talk to you about Earthbound spirits, because although NDEs sound like they're wonderful and we can make them a positive experience, and we could even take a negative if we have one and make it a positive, some people, it's believed, are left behind with the Earthbound spirit phenomena. I want to get your take on this.
Okay. Actually, I go into this in the audiobook that people can download. It's called What Happens When We Die, and it's part of the free gift. And yeah, it's this sometimes happens. It would appear that some people get stuck. And I mentioned Bruce Moen at the beginning of the program. And Bruce gave an amazing workshop in our home about 12, 14, 15 years ago. And Bruce Moen teaches anyone to be able to make contact with people who have become stuck and help those people move on. And also his techniques can enable you to gain validation that the experience was actually real, that you had. I mean, that sounds extraordinary, but it's true. And in this workshop, we had people from all over Europe come to our home. It was in 2001. And he literally taught every person in that room, about 20, 25 people, how to make contact with people who passed on. People particularly who had got stuck, and then help move that person on. And it's incredible. I'll give you an experience. On the last day of the workshop, this technique, it's called doing retrievals, and the Monroe Institute also does this kind of work, and really worth looking into. But my wife was a nurse in Australia, and she used to nurse a gentleman, and he used to jokingly call her Michelle. You know, that's not her name, but he used to call her my daughter Michelle. And he was a farmer, and he wore a cap. And so that was a few years before, and it was a hospice. She was nursing in a hospice, and he died. And the last day of this workshop with Bruce Moen, in our sitting room, we all did his technique, and we all tried to make contact with someone who had passed over and get a message from that person. These were not people who were stuck, but people who we knew personally, or that someone in the room knew. So we were all getting a message for someone in the room, not for ourselves, okay? Because we needed validation from each other that what was said was true. And basically, this guy from Italy, he made contact with this guy. He said he's an old man. He's wearing a cap. He seems to be Australian. He's pointing at his throat. Maybe he had throat cancer. And the message is, tell my daughter Michelle that I'm sorry I never told her that I loved her. Wow. And my wife nearly collapsed, because you can't get more specific than that. This guy had never done anything psychic in his entire life, and yet he was able to communicate a really crystal clear message like that. Phenomenal. But Bruce Moen's training, basically, people who die tragically, and in various different circumstances, they can, in some cases, they don't move on to where they should, and they can get stuck. They can be very attached to life. There can be a lot of unresolved business, and they don't move on, or they're not quite ready to move on. But it is possible to make contact with such people and move them on. And a lot of people have been trained in this retrievals technique, and it can really help people who die tragically and don't know that they're dead. You know, well, so these things do happen. I believe they do happen, and I've had direct evidence that it does happen, but it can be helped. It can be alleviated. Mike,
how do you move somebody on who maybe feels like they have unfinished business here, or they are attached to this life? How do you convince them that, you know what, you're better off moving on?
Yeah, well, Bruce's technique, it's many years since I've actually tried it, but I used it quite a lot back in the 2001, 2002, 2003, and I was astounded by it. And then life got very difficult because we lost everything, and I had to put all this aside. I had to put the Institute for Afterlife Research aside, and I had to work 16-hour days and do all sorts of things to change the situation, but I did. And gratitude changed all that. But in Bruce's work, basically, he teaches you how to perceive, using your mind's eye, doing kind of visualization and meditation, perceive people who have got stuck. And then you don't move them on, but you introduce them to a helper or a guide who can move them on. Because as Bruce and also the Monroe Institute explain, people who have unresolved business and are literally see their relatives and friends walking around, their point of focus is the physical world. And people, entities, evolved entities, helpers, guides who are there to help them move on, they appear to them like ghosts, you know. Right. So it's in Bruce's technique, he helps you to introduce the guide to the person. Because the person who has got stuck, their point of focus is physical life, you have a much better chance of making contact with them than someone who's already in the afterlife. So it's something that you can do more potently while you're alive, if moving someone on who's currently stuck. Now, people don't stay stuck forever. Everyone moves on eventually, but I think, Tim, I know you've been a paranormal investigator for years. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what we call entities can be fragments of the person's consciousness that have been left behind, that the person themselves have moved on, but some emotional charge is left behind. It doesn't mean the entire entity is here. That can happen, but I think in most cases it's some strong emotional imprint that's left. I mean, what are your own views?
I'm intrigued by that theory, and I tell you what we'll do. Let's dip out real quick and take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about that residual energy from a person maybe being that lower level entity and it being the person themselves. Because it's a very intriguing theory to me, and I first heard about this theory a few years ago. And I would like to think it's just residual energy from a person, their negative emotions shed off, and because there are malevolent spirits, and I want to get into that as well in this next segment. The website, unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. You can get the entire book, Unlock Gratitude Now, 7 Keys to a Happier, More Successful Life, for free right now. Not just that, but you also get a free audiobook having to do with the afterlife, what we're talking about now, and a free video. It's the best deal you're going to get this weekend, Mike. I'm convinced of it.
And it's free.
Be sure to go to the website right now, unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. Take a look at it during the break. When we come back, more with Mike Pettigrew here on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.
Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor.
Welcome back to Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennison for Dave Schrader. Our guest is Mike Pettigrew. The book is Unlock Gratitude Now, 7 Keys to a Happier and More Successful Life. You want to check out the book, the entire book? You get it for free right now, along with a free audio book and a free video. UnlockGratitudeNow.com/gift. I almost called you Matthew. Mike! I've got my
That's
Matthews.
okay,
I've got the Bible on my mind, evidently. Matthew, Mike, Paul, John, it's all the same. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about earthbound spirits. And I'm intrigued with the theory of an earthbound spirit being negative energy that's maybe been shed off by a spirit that's moved on. I'd like to think that that's it. I would really hate to think that in this life, you have the potential to be stuck on this earth. That to me would be almost a nightmare if there's something better to move on to. To me, that's the ultimate expression of fear, that you couldn't get yourself to the point where you wanted to move on to something happier and better because it was unknown, and you'd rather stick with the devil you know than the devil you don't. But there is that entity of malevolent spirits that we come across when we're investigating, the things that pull your hair or scratch you or don't exactly play nice with you. In your opinion, what is that?
Well, I think just like in physical life, there are people who are kind, caring, loving, compassionate, and there are people who are bitter, twisted, resentful, and aggressive. And when you pass over, you don't suddenly grow wings and flutter away off into the light. Not at all. And birds of a feather flock together. Like energy attracts like. And it is possible that people who move on, in some cases, do through choice, not just through what you might call like an accident, but through choice, wish to stay close by. And from my studies of this, it would appear that people who do choose to stay right here need energy from the living. They need energy from the living. And I remember one guy, his name is Joe Fisher. He wrote an incredible book that's extremely disturbing. and it's called The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts. The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts. And it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for anyone who is investigating life after death and channeling, etc. Because what he discovered was very, very disturbing. He met a medium, I think it was in Toronto, I think it was in Canada, and this medium was very ill, but she was very gifted, and she would go into trance and she would channel different entities. And to cut a long story short, she channeled his guide, and this guide claimed to have shared a past life in, I think, Greece with him. And as time went by, that entity, that so-called guide, started communicating directly with him by a buzzing sensation in his head. And it went, so she could communicate with him through yes and no, 2 buzzes for yes, 1 buzz for no, or vice versa. So he started getting direct communication. And he found this so intriguing, he decided to check out the past lives of several of these entities that claimed to be guides to the living. And he went to, I think, Scotland and various other countries to check out, and looking through old county registers and births and deaths registers. And he found that none of these entities ever had a physical incarnation. And this was extremely disturbing to him. And then he went on to investigate a lot of fairly well-known mediums. And his findings were very similar. Now, I'm not saying that mediums are not doing a good job, but there are many mediums who are communicating with absolutely the people that they claim to be communicating with, and that they're passing on real communication from deceased loved ones. But often, it's something we need to ponder seriously, that a medium is like a telephone, but we don't really know who's on the other end of the line. We don't really know who's on the other end of the line. And, they might be posing as Great Aunt Betsy, and they may have the same cough as Great Aunt Betsy and the memories of Great Aunt Betsy. But I think you mentioned malevolent entities. I think some very much earthbound entities can read the subconscious of the individual who they're communicating to. So it's very easy to pose as someone, as a deceased loved one, when they're actually nothing of the sort. So, I mean, this is an area where I can't prove anything,
right?
But it's an area that, this book, The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts, very disturbing, but a wake-up call for people who just love channeling.
Mike, do you subscribe to the demonic and that is an influence in the afterlife? Because there are some people who are very firmly, there is no such thing as hell or demons. There are other people who say, you know what, you can't have good without evil. Where do you fall on that?
I think there's balance and there's unbalance, and I think everything has a purpose. I don't think there's eternal damnation for anyone, but I do feel that I think that everything can have purpose. Even the most negative experiences can have purpose. I don't think someone is trapped forever. I think there are many entities that pose as certain demonic entities. I do believe that. And I believe that some people who pass on, who are very negative, can over time become more negative and more negative. But absolute evil, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that. I remember my friend who I mentioned at the very beginning of the program, the healer from the UK. It was around about the time of the Gulf War, I think. And he said something very strange to me one day while driving. And he said, Saddam Hussein must have been a very evolved entity. And I nearly crashed the car. I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, well, think about this. He said, if we as human beings choose the circumstances, the major circumstances of our lives before we incarnate, including the positive and the negative, and he said, just imagine being Saddam Hussein, choosing the life that he's about to be born into, choosing to be a dictator, choosing to create huge amount of suffering that will cause incredible growth to many people and also cause terrible, terrible stuff for people. He said, imagine choosing that and knowing that karmically you're actually dimming your spirituality dramatically, and yet you still come into your incarnation being a dictator. That would require great strength. Now, I'm not sure, Tim, if I agree with what he said, but it's a thought that he made me ponder on many times, and I still haven't come to a conclusion 20 years later.
I don't blame you. That will kind of mess with your mind a little bit. Yeah.
It's good. And I really don't know one way or another, but I'm absolutely sure that everything in the universe has purpose, and everything is moving us towards growth, happiness, and compassion, even though the events and experiences are the opposite.
Got about a minute left here with you, Mike. Tell me, what is it that you're hoping to achieve karmically with what you put out there with the book Unlock Gratitude Now?
Well, to be honest, my purpose in this world is to empower people. I've been very clear about that for many, many, many years. I think the greatest gift we can give any human being is empowerment, help people change their circumstances and become happy and fulfilled. And I have two programs. One is a 6 CD audio program. It's called the 30-Day Success Formula, and that's at the30daysuccessformula.com. And I also have another program called the Millionaire Mind Secrets. That's at themillionairemindsecrets.com. And that includes a lot of tools that I mentioned earlier that will help people really quickly change their lives, including self-hypnosis, binaural beats, subliminal technology, all sorts of technologies that will help reprogram our subconscious mind for success rather than its opposite.
Absolutely. And then you have a special gift again for our Darkness Radio listeners. Tell people what they get when they go to unlockgratitudenow.com/gift.
Sure, Tim. Well, firstly, it includes the full text of my book, my bestseller, Unlock Gratitude Now. It also includes What Happens When We Die. It's a full audio book. And also a video course, 30 Days to Empowerment, Success and Happiness. And that includes a demonstration of a mind over matter experiment. And this is an experiment you can do yourself and move small objects with the mind. You won't be able to do it immediately, but you'll see how to do it, and then you can test it for yourself. And if you're persistent, quite quickly, you may be astounded that your mind really is affecting your environment. And then when you know that through your direct experience, it means you can really start to change your life in a very positive direction very quickly.
Can't wait to see it and try it out. Again, our guest has been Mike Pettigrew. Go to unlockgratitudenow.com/gift. Get the free book, the free audio book, the free video. And we come back. Our next guest for the next hour is Ellen Baumler. We'll be talking about the ghosts of Montana. That's coming up next right here on Darkness Radio.